Something that's really interesting about Easter Sunday weekend is that depending on which Mass you go to, you have a different gospel, right? And so at the Vigil, you have the story of the women at the empty tomb. At dawn, you have the story of Mary Magdalene. Woman, why are you weeping? Whom are you searching for? And then, of course, if you go to Easter Sunday Mass in the afternoon, you have that really famous story of the two disciples on the road to Emmaus. But that said, of all the different stories I just cited, the one that I find to be most important in terms of shaping our particular understanding of the essence of the Christian thing is, in fact, the story of the two disciples on the road to Emmaus, which is why I find it to be really interesting that this is the primary focal point when it comes to the third Sunday of Easter. And so obviously the story takes place in the aftermath of the crucifixion, right? And so the two disciples are walking away from Jerusalem, the site of the crucifixion, and walking towards this village called Emmaus. And then Jesus kind of encounters them along the way, right? And he notices that they're sad and downcast. And then he asks them, like, what's bothering you? In response to which they say, basically, we had hoped. And so we had this great expectation that Jesus would be the Messiah to liberate us from all things, but now we realize that he was just a prophet, mighty indeed. In other words, they've lost their faith. It might suggest, friends, that's actually a recurring pattern that we find throughout the course of the gospel, preceding this particular story. And so think, for example, of the Last Supper. And so Jesus is obviously having this final meal with his disciples, and he boldly predicts that one of them will betray him. In response to which they all say, one at a time, some variation of, surely not I, Lord. The only exception is Judas Iscariot, the one who has already betrayed the Lord for 30 pieces of silver. And so what he says is not so much, surely not I, Lord. What he says is, surely not I, Rabbi. So surely not I, Master. And so an overt downgrade from Lord, which is another name for God, to Rabbi/Master. And even though that particular shift in terms of word choice might seem to be simply a matter of semantics, I would suggest it's no coincidence that immediately after that exchange, Judas goes forth and betrays the Lord to the local authorities. Now, funny enough, you find a similar thing going on in this earlier story at Caesarea Philippi, where Jesus is speaking to St. Peter. And so initially what happens is that Jesus asks his disciples collectively, who do people say that I am? In response to which they say, well, some people say Elijah, some people say John the Baptist. But then Jesus says to them, who do you say that I am? In response to which Peter says, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. And in response to that, Jesus basically says, you are correct. Flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but in fact, my Father in heaven has done so. And you are Peter, and on this rock I shall found my church. So far, so good. But then what happens, Jesus predicts his death. He predicts his suffering and death at the hands of his enemies. In response to which, of course, Peter rebukes him, right? So he tries to discourage him from going the way of the cross. In response to which Jesus says to him, get behind me, Satan, you have become a stumbling block to me. Now, the thing I want you to notice here is that Peter actually says a lot of true things. You are the Christ, you are the Son of the living God, you are the Messiah. So far, so good. But what he's missing is this notion that he is the suffering Messiah, which makes all the difference in the world. So he's advocating a certain kind of political revolution as opposed to redemption through the way of the cross. And that, again, is the reason why Jesus rebukes him harshly. And of course, the takeaway message is that if you want to become a leader within the context of the church, a great witness to the Christian thing, you need to have enormous clarity as to who Jesus is, failing which you will fall away yourself and drag other people down with you. And you see, that's why, going back to the story of the two disciples on the road to Emmaus, Jesus responds to their lack of faith by walking them through the scriptures, walking them through the Old Testament and interpreting the Hebrew scriptures in light of himself, in light of his identity as the suffering Messiah, revealing himself to be the new Adam, the new Moses, the new David, and so on and so forth. And in this, obviously, what he's saying to these guys is that it's really important for you people to know that I'm not simply a good guy, I'm not simply a rabbi, I'm not simply a teacher or a master or a prophet, but instead, truly, I am the Messiah, the one who is truly prefigured in the Old Testament, and the one who is truly the fulfillment of all the law and the prophets. Okay, to further illustrate this point using a somewhat concrete example, I remember years ago hearing about this study, citing various reasons why people had fallen away from the practice of the Christian faith. And one reason that was cited time and time again was that people fell away from the practice of the faith because their home life was unhappy. Even though mom and dad may have said all the right things, God is real, Jesus Christ is a Messiah. At the same time, these kids didn't see their parents overtly invite Jesus Christ to be the Messiah in their own lives. And because they didn't see that, they fell away themselves from the practice of the faith. And so, given all that, the challenge and invitation, if you're a parent, just to be clear, is to not simply say in front of your kids, Jesus Christ is Lord, or Jesus Christ is the Messiah of the world, but instead the invitation is to discover for yourself how Jesus can save you, how he can draw you away from all those dark places in your heart to really find joy and freedom and new life. And on top of that, it's really important for you to discover that the only path to new life is through the narrow way of the cross. And so to be really convicted of the fact that you don't find life by clinging and possessing and controlling and having, but truly by giving yourself away out of love, an imitation of the one who is truly the suffering servant from the prophet Isaiah. Okay, one final point, and I'll kind of end with this. And so basically, of the two disciples on the road to Emmaus, one of them is named Cleopas. The other one is unidentified. But Cleopas, if you look at the Gospel of John, is the uncle of Jesus. His wife was one of the women at the foot of the cross when Jesus was suffering and dying for the salvation of the world. In any case, it's a pretty subtle point, but an important one all the same, because it reminds us that insofar as we come to really take our faith seriously, and we come in particular to really own the fact that Jesus Christ is not simply the Savior of the world, but in fact is my Savior, my Redeemer, we come to actually bring people closer to Christ. First of all, beginning with the sanctification of people in our circle of influence, people like our family and friends, but also in them and through them, the rest of the world. And may God bless you all.